Hello, and welcome to episode 23 of the Talos Principle. Can't believe we got through all the levels. Last episode we went through level 7, got everything there's to get there, but we shall not be crossing through the plane to a higher existence quite yet. I want to collect all the stuff from the star doors and I believe they're called the Guardian Chambers. Something different about this episode than the last is that this is done in post-commentary. The reason is, I've never actually been to the star door areas before. Either I haven't collected enough stars on my first playthrough, or I just skipped over them. So these areas are going to be new for me as well, and because of that, I'm going to go through it all without my usual method of watching a playthrough first and then going through it myself, and then finally doing a finalized recording going through so I can show about as good of a footage as I can while rambling on and on about various subjects. Still, I will edit out a lot of the longer meanderings around and total confusion, and try to edit out some of the parts leading up to my deaths. For a fact, there will be 3 episodes like this, one for each of the star door levels in each of the worlds. But if it goes over well here, I might do it for the Guardian levels as well. So what am I going to talk about today? Well, I've been thinking about the one chief fear people have when it comes to transhumanist technology. And that is essentially they're worried that they're going to lose their humanity. I don't necessarily think that's a huge worry, and that sort of stems from all the answers of what makes us human. Such a question might seem a bit straightforward. After all, it's our DNA, and that's basically that. The reason we're human and not, say, a chimpanzee, or a dolphin, or a palm tree. But, of course, there's a philosophical level to that as well. But first, let's see what's on the terminal. The first bit of text is another explanation of what the Talos Principle is, what the meaning is behind the game's title. Indeed, we are going back to the basics in this Star Road level. The second is basically a synopsis of the movie Osmosis Jones, like really the human body as a giant city and blood vessels as highways. Third bit of text is a letter between the people working on Talos Principle itself, another letter of dire urgency, but the events where everybody has started dying off hasn't quite happened yet. And the final is a picture of the tower we are yet to climb up. Initially I thought there were 6 sigils to collect, but there's only 3. I have no idea what that sign there means. Now, first door I go through, you actually aren't able to solve just by walking in, but need to handle something in the center of the area here, and I did not realize that until a bit later. So anyways, back to the topic at hand. there's a lot of philosophical issues to the question of what it means to be human outside of just our DNA, but I'd like to go through a few of the things that we use when we talk about what it means to be human and explain why those aren't going to be necessarily lost, or why those aren't even necessarily exclusive to humans. Now, first thing is, we really can't strictly use biology as the basis of what it means to be human and mourn over the loss, because human beings are far too varied a species to hold that sort of weight on it. Like, it's generally accepted that a human being is a mammal with, let's say, 2 arms and 2 legs, 2 eyes on their face. Except there are plenty of human beings who are missing limbs or have non-functioning body parts, and yet they would still be regarded as human despite these limitations. Another issue is that we don't start and stop at strictly humanity even without transhumanism. The fact that when it's extremely cold out, we don't walk around with our skin exposed to the elements, but instead put on a coat. This is so we can better survive in places where we would be otherwise completely unable to survive due to how frigid the environment is. But no one necessarily mourns the loss of humanity every time they put on a winter coat. The worry would come from how permanent the changes are, or would seem. Having a robotic heart or a mechanical arm would certainly be a lot more permanent than a winter coat. But even then, people still regularly alter their bodies in permanent ways, such as getting a tattoo or a piercing, and they still don't think of themselves as less than human, or more than human, or to have lost their humanity. Oh, by the way, I fucked up here. This key isn't going to work with this gate, so yeah, you can see it is a first time run. So the point is, despite our bodies and our general biology being the most objective answer to the question of what it means to be human, that's the one aspect of us we change and alter most liberally, even without transhumanism. Now to the philosophical side of things. For fuck's sake, these guys are moving around diagonally. I really hate those things. Philosophically, people point to things like our incredible intelligence and our incredible ability to do things that other animals or other life forms aren't able to do, or aren't able to do in the fullest capacity that we are. For example, birds make music, ants build architecture, elephants show an incredible level of emotional intelligence to the point where they are able to recognize the voice of specific elephants. In fact, an experiment was done where a group of scientists played the recording of a then deceased elephant. Like, they recorded the elephant when it was alive, and then when it died, they played the recording for the other elephants to hear, and it actually spurred the other elephants to go around looking for their dead companion. The daughter of the recorded elephant even was calling out to her mother for 4 days after the recording being played. Suffice to say, the scientists felt absolutely awful and agreed never to do that again. So the point here is that even though we're able to do things in such greater capacities than other animals, I would argue that the divide between us and anything else isn't necessarily as large as we make it out to be. Oh, by the way, I hate this one. Like, birds aren't making musical compositions at the level of Beethoven. Sure, but what do birds and humans have in common when it comes to reasons for making music? Both birds and humans seem to make seem to compose music to attract mates. What do you think all these love songs are about? Even doing things for prestige or to make money can be viewed as just an extension of very natural endeavors. You make money or gain the ability to collect more resources, which would make you much more appealing to potential mates. You get prestige that would give you some level of social mobility or social hierarchy among the tribe. But I will grant it that we do things that other animals just aren't as inclined to do. Alexandra, in one of the previous recordings, mentioned our capacity to play, which is a sign of higher intelligence, that we do things to figure out for just fun. Now, other animals have been observed to play before, but again, this is a matter of us doing it in ways and reasons that are far beyond any other life form. So humans are indeed special in that case, but that's not something I see being lost in a transhumanist future. No advocate for transhumanism or anyone who writes about it optimistically sees a world where we no longer enjoy things, we no longer take pleasure or have fun. In fact, some people would argue that we'd have even more capacity for fun because we are far less limited in that future than we are now. For example, if we are able to hear even more subtle sounds, what does that say for our musical capabilities? Could we perhaps compose pieces far more complex and far more beautiful than we are able to now? The monkey's paw in the case would be that if our hearing is so much better than it is now, we'd start to see the wear, tear, and general imperfections of our music today. A very beautiful, perfectly crafted piece would suddenly start to sound a bit grating because our hearing is so advanced that we are able to see the most subtle, minute issues with the composition. the solution to this is basically being able to control how well you're able to hear, how in tune and advanced it is. Oh, by the way, I initially assumed that you're supposed to take these two jammers out and use it at that one level, but that's not the case, so even though I haven't made any progress per se, I still do totally embarrass this level. Show it who's boss. While it might not be exactly a satisfying answer, that the answer to the question is just, again, better technology, I think that will be the case to balance out the improved abilities that we'd have, and thus the greater chance to appreciate far more in life even than we do now, while still being able to appreciate things that are going to show their imperfections. And the only reason we don't really see it now is because our senses and capability to take in the world is much more limited than it could be. However, the point still does stand that this huge aspect of humanity, our ability to do things that other species do but at a level so much greater than they possibly can, is not only going to be retained in a transhumanist future, but is going to be even greater than what we have now. If that is your definition of humanity, we are indeed more than human, but also much more human than we are now, if that makes any sense. And then there's the things that we do that nature simply doesn't do. No other species performs surgery. If you are a member of any other species in the wild and you see your own intestines, you are already dead. Meanwhile, we've advanced medical science to the point where we're able to cut open members of our own species and of other species, try to fix internal errors, stitch them back up, and then in a few weeks or a few months, they are better off than they were before they were cut up. Similarly, we're the only species that has been able to take itself into space. Every other species that has gone to space has been an unwilling passenger, more or less. However, the issue is that these things that are so incredible are also part of such a small subset of humanity. The vast majority of people aren't surgeons or aren't rocket scientists, so it would be a bit silly, I think, or a bit impractical to define humanity on the basis of things that so little of humanity can actually meet. Some of the stuff, there's just people who simply cannot do it, no matter how hard they try. And not even talking about people with mental deficiencies like retardation, but, for example, surgery is a high-risk, high-stakes, high-stress endeavor. You're poking around the insides of another human being. One little mistake can be the difference between life and death. some people just aren't able to handle stress in that way. You can see that the mirror world is actually a bit different than our own world here. But some people just can't handle the stress, and if there is an amount of practice and working that can help them overcome it, it's certainly, I think, beyond any sort of reasonable criteria or reasonable length to say that, again, this stuff is what's supposed to represent humanity. Now, a particular idea within transhumanism is the ability to share raw knowledge from brain to brain, like either download memories or experiences, maybe alter the physical composition of the brain so that knowledge, even as advanced as surgery or rocket scientists, are able to be given to a person much faster and much easier than it is today. The objection to that is basically that our imperfections is what makes us individuals and unique. We can't all be great at everything, but even with the technology, we won't be. Some people just aren't going to be interested in knowing how to perform surgery or build rockets, even with it available. Just like there's all this information online available about so many subjects, and we aren't very inclined to go out and learn as much as we can about everything. They also think that the grind of practice is what makes us human or what makes it special, and that something significant will be lost if we get rid of that. But to that I say is, are you saying that because you actually believe it? Or is it like death itself, where we say it because currently there's no alternative? Anyone who holds this opinion, I ask that you try to withhold it a little bit. Try to keep a bit of an open mind until we live in a world where we are able to do this. When I'm able to download advanced cooking skills, or how to be a really good jockey, or how to do woodworking at the level of the absolute masters, without needing to do a ton of practicing or a ton of grinding. If that world ends up being far worse than the one we live in today, then I think you'd be right, but I just don't see it. Oh, by the way, I'm going to lose the axe here, like, either completely misplace it or it simply disappears. I think it honestly disappeared from the world. And you need the axe to complete the puzzle, so I had to go back. Alright, where'd I leave this, honestly? But I had to then go back and chop down all the trees again, because I wanted to see if there was an achievement for chopping down all the trees. It was no fun, but all that is edited out, so don't worry. And here we go. I'm just a bit hard-pressed to think, and maybe it's just my bias in favor of transhumanism, but I'm hard-pressed to think of an aspect of humanity that's desirable that will be totally lost. and me being incredibly practical, there's some less desirable, less good qualities of humanity, and it's thinking that I simply do not care if we lose. I think it would be beneficial if we lose. Whatever it is in the mind of man that is able to make him outright ignore, just as set in stone as absolutely possible within the realm of science, those facts, like, the Earth being round and not flat. Let's use a very extreme example here that some people still literally don't accept, that the Earth is round. Whatever it is in our minds that causes that, and we lose it, I think we would overall benefit. And by the way, I'm really cautious about that axe now. But I do think that if we stay absolutely vigilant in this potentially coming age of technology, like nothing is set in stone, we could all nuke ourselves to oblivion, of course. But if it does happen, as long as we remain vigilant and keep these ideas of inalienable human rights and personal autonomy and all such things, then I don't think we will be losing the great aspects of ourselves that quote-unquote make us human. It might not exactly be a very great answer, but it is a necessary answer. With anything, be it a new technology, or within politics, or whatever, it's going to be up to the people to be the watchdogs of their own lives, of their own freedoms. Kind of like how in the US there's a bit of a crisis of democracy where some people's votes aren't being counted, or there's voter suppression or gerrymandering. A lot of people would argue that democracy, despite its flaws, is a really good system, but we have to remain vigilant because it's not able to solve all its problems. We'll have to do that ourselves. One final thing I want to mention is that a lot of people, I don't think, are truly worried about not being human as much as they might say they are. For example, the religious members of humanity believe that when they die, they will leave their material body as some abstract soul, fly into a different plane of existence, and live for eternity over there. And yet that's about as inhuman as you could possibly get. I've already used the more practical, less permanent, and just generally accepted augmentations like, say, putting on a coat. But it really is the fact of the matter that we've already sort of reached a point where we've augmented ourselves with technology today, though not as permanent or grafted as stuff in transhumanism, or with all these different philosophical, theological ideals. It might seem like a no-brainer statement to say that transhumanism, you're not going to be human. After all, that's what it is, transcending humanity. But like a lot of things in life, it's just not as clear-cut as a very simple, very basic statement. To the contrary, I think that if we do remain vigilant and do look out for ourselves, we will retain a lot of our humanity, a lot of the things that we love about ourselves and our species. So, like everything else, we should be facing this future with our eyes open, with an optimistic but rational view, and of course, in all irony, with the intention of keeping these inalienable human rights that we have decided that we as human beings should have by virtue of being born human. But that's just my thoughts. I'd like to know your opinion as well. Are there any aspects of humanity that you think is what makes us human, either from a practical, biological standpoint or philosophical standpoint? And do you think those would be lost in a transhumanist future? And is it even bad that they would be lost? Ask yourself that. Or would they be strengthened, made much more powerful than they are now? That pretty much concludes this episode. It was interesting doing a blind playthrough. I hope you enjoyed it and that I gave you something to think about. Take care.